Hey, welcome back to Common Sense OT Security, where we look at various OT security topics through the lens of common sense, which is usually very refreshing and different from what you hear in other places. Today, I'm going to discuss how to make OT vulnerability management easy. In order to give you some context, let's first examine, well, why is it difficult? Why is OT vulnerability management hard? Think about that for a second. The simple answer is it's because of the cost of mitigation. As simple as that. So in mitigation costs, vulnerability remediation is much more expensive in OT than in IT. If remediation was free, then we wouldn't need to talk about OT security because everybody would just get rid of all those nasty vulnerabilities. But obviously, as you know, that's not the case. It's very expensive. And for that reason, some smart people have identified various ways how to identify those vulnerabilities that really, really deserve mitigation, or in other words, that put you in big trouble if you left those unmitigated. And that's usually called vulnerability prioritization. And there are various strategies for how to make it happen. You will most definitely know about the most common approach, which is risk-based. You have heard it over and over again. So you just analyze the risk, and then you single out, or you just bring all your vulnerabilities into a ranking, and then you focus on the worst shit that's usually on top of that list that you arrive at. And then there are a couple of methodologies how to make that happen. Usually people focus on the CVE severity that is provided by NIST. You can see that in the CVE description. Some factor in other parameters, such as the attack complexity, such as the question if the vulnerability is network exploitable or if you would need to have local access, etc. And yet others go to great lengths to identify those vulnerabilities that might lead to disastrous consequences if exploited. And I would say this is probably the favorite approach of Dale Peterson that he has talked about a couple of times. And basically, it's about the high consequence scenario. So the question is, how can you single out those vulnerabilities that, if exploited, would result in high consequence events? Okay, and just recently we have seen a talk at S4. Let me bring this up by a Dragos employee, and he's elaborating on how Dragos uses the decision tree based methodology that was introduced also at S4 by Art Mannion. What to patch when in OT, a methodology. And as you can see, both talks are available on YouTube on the S4 channel. I urge you to check out both of these talks, and as you can see in that talk from 2019, even yours truly is also present and shares his ideas. Now, where is the problem here? I can tell you, I can show you. So this gives you an idea of that decision tree, and if you actually take the 30 minutes to go through this video, through this talk, and also check out the other talk, you cannot fail to miss, well, that's still complicated as fuck. I don't want to go through this. Or you could also say, well, if I wanted to go through this, I would need a team of 10 or 20 people. Because it's really not that simple. And we are here to talk about how to make OT vulnerability management easy. This is what I want to pitch you today. So I urge you to just forget everything you have heard about OT vulnerability management and prioritization. I ask you to take a step back and ask yourself, so what are vulnerabilities all about? What do they boil down to? I can tell you what they boil down to. They boil down to products with bugs. Okay, that's what the CVE, what every single CVE is about. So due to a bug in a product, usually a software product, that creates a vulnerability that, if exploited, will lead to outage or explosions, millions of people without power and water, etc. So you know all the scenarios. So we are focusing here on the ultimate point where it all starts. That is a product with some problematic features which are in the product, usually unintentionally. Okay, and if that is the case, wouldn't it be smart to single out products in your installed base that are responsible for a ton of vulnerabilities, that are like known troublemakers, the usual suspects? Wouldn't that be an interesting idea? And I tell you, my friends, it is quite interesting, because it will open your eyes. You will see all of a sudden, well, you know, a bulk of all those nasty vulnerabilities that I have to bother with go back to just I won't say a handful of products, but a small number of products. So, I mean, if you have a background in engineering, you already figure it out. Well, this looks something like the Pareto principle, and it's exactly what it's all about. So what we try to do is we try to, without talking about cost of consequence, etc., we try to identify the major troublemakers from our hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities. And don't get me wrong, this is a realistic number. So in a large manufacturing operation, as an example, you are talking about hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities. If your OT security product doesn't show that, you probably should dump it and replace it with something more accurate. And that attack surface is created not by hundreds of thousands of products, obviously. No, it's created by a small number of products, of the usual suspects, of the troublemakers. And well, how would I know? Very simple, because when we look at our customer base, we see millions of vulnerabilities, and we see those patterns. Okay, and even for an individual installation, you could see that in OT base. Let me quickly show you how that looks like. So in OT base, in the CVE workspace, we have this particular view where you can arrive at a list of software products, and the list shows you how much each individual software product contributes to the attack surface. So just by clicking on tree map, I would see where the big troublemakers are. And I would imagine this tree map doesn't surprise anybody in OT security, because you'd say, oh, Microsoft Windows, yeah, we had already suspected that. And then you got Google Chrome, you got Google Flash Player, and a couple of other outdated operating systems, okay? So that was almost to be expected. And one other note here, we have pre-filtered this list to only show those vulnerabilities, or only to factor in those vulnerabilities with known exploits. So this is the KEV checkbox right here. It's turned on, and this is something that we usually suggest to do, because what is the biggest problem presently? It's ransomware. Okay, and you could pretty much translate KEV to ransomware. Right, so that is the important, or one important takeaway here. When you just imagine, well, all those known exploits. Who is exploiting? Who are those hackers? No, it's not about hackers. It's about ransomware operators. So that should be a prime focus on what you're doing here. And then again, if you take a closer look and look at the troublemakers, you will see there are some very high on the list. And that also implies that if you would address those particular products, that's going to give you a lot of mileage, my friends. So again, let's go back to what we see in our customer base. Obviously, Windows 7, that is a big troublemaker. And then besides Windows 7, we have a couple of additional troublemakers in the application area. And now it gets very interesting, because usually, I mean, updating Windows 7, that's some heavy lifting in OT environments. But when you look at applications, it's really not that difficult. And I'll tell you why. So when I talk about applications, don't think, well, okay, now we are talking about SCADA products, etc., some quality management software. No, we're not. We're basically talking about office style or IT style software, with the major troublemakers being web browsers, my friends. Web browsers are prone for new CVEs pretty much every single week. So that's just a fact. And let me try to show you some examples here. So let's go back to OTBase. If we just look at the list for our sample database here of an OT installation with around about, I think it's 5,000 or 6,000 individual devices. So now we are looking at the new CVEs that had dropped in out of the blue the last week, okay? Just the last week, the last 7 days. And now look at the descriptions here. Use after free in Google Chrome. Use after free in Google Chrome. Google Chrome, Google Chrome, Google Chrome, okay? Isn't that interesting? Google Chrome, Google Chrome, Google Chrome. Does that tell you something? I hope it does. So just a ton of new vulnerabilities, all from yesterday, for this one product, okay? Excuse me. And then we have Adobe Acrobat. So that just underscores my point. We are looking at some usual suspects. And why is that interesting from a remediation perspective? So I tell you what we want to arrive at, what our objective is. We want to arrive at performance-based vulnerability management. That means you can actually show results, not for this one new celebrity vulnerability that everybody is now talking on LinkedIn. No, that is just delusional, right? It doesn't reduce your attack surface in any significant way, because again, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities. So performance-based means we want to make a difference that you can show. Or all of a sudden you have eliminated, let's just say, 10,000 vulnerabilities. How does that sound? Well, and that's possible. And this is what you are going to get when you have identified those troublemakers and addressed those. So as I told you, web browsers extremely high on the list. There are new vulnerabilities every single week in Google Chrome and also in Edge, because guess what? Edge also uses Chromium, the Chromium engine, okay? In Firefox, etc. So how would you mitigate those tens of thousands of vulnerabilities? Well, it's actually not that difficult. How about updating the web browser? Not that difficult, right? And an even better solution would be to uninstall the damn thing. And here is another insight that I believe is really interesting. So let's go back to OTBase. In OT-base, you can also see in those lists, so we're singling out Google Chrome in our vulnerability list as far as it pertains to software. And now OT-base tells us right away where we have installations that haven't been used for more than a year. Just imagine that. So, and all of you know what or how big that problem is, right? Somebody had installed a browser on that PC. Somebody had installed Acrobat Reader on that PC, but it's basically not needed, and therefore nobody uses it. And this information is picked up automatically by OT-base discovery, to be precise. Okay, it's picked up automatically. And you will see right away in this particular profile where you have those installations. Like, for example, in our Flatrock plant, these are the 6 boxes where you have Google Chrome installed, but it hasn't been used for a year or longer. Okay? So if I were the OT security person in that plant, I would say, okay, uninstall right away, no question about that. If that software wasn't used for a year, apparently it's not needed. Okay, and that is really going a long way, because if you consider that Chrome will produce additional vulnerabilities next week, just as an example, you don't need to worry about those, because let me remind you of that great insight from chemical engineering, and this is about tanks. The insight is, what you don't have can't leak. The tank that you don't have cannot produce a leak. And this is what you should apply also in your remediation efforts when you think about system hardening. So best case, you would identify, well, we don't need that damn software anyway, so let's just uninstall it. And this can frequently be seen, not just with web browsers, but also with Office software, Microsoft Office. Somebody had installed Microsoft Office on that Windows box a long time ago. It's actually not needed. Okay, so that is another troublemaker. And then you have the nightmare products such as Adobe Flash Player. Just get rid of that dumb shit. Okay, it has no place in an OT environment. It drags thousands of vulnerabilities behind it, and well, that's all easy to figure out where you have those installations. OT-base will tell you just like that in a second, and that gives you quite a good angle towards performance-based OT vulnerability management. And again, that means we want to see a difference. We want to make a difference. We want to see it in the numbers. We want to see the attack surface shrink. So, summing it up, if you have the capacity, then just go through that exercise with the decision trees and try to identify those vulnerabilities in the consequence-based, risk-based approach that could really ruin your day. And to be honest, it makes total logical sense. Well, I certainly get it. I support this idea. However, from a practical perspective, the problem is it takes too long. It requires too many resources. I mean, just try it for once. You can easily go through that. I take the easily away. You can go through this exercise and see how long it would require you. Back in the days, 2019, we had, together with Art Mannion, we had tried to arrive at some form of automation, but unfortunately, that didn't work so well. So This is another reason why I have my reservations these days about this approach. Again, from a logical perspective, it all makes sense. It all checks out. But what matters at the end of the day is the actual risk reduction, or probably a better word would be the reduction of the attack surface that you can show. To management. And also, again, coming back to the present threat environment, I have to tell you, and now we're looking more at likelihood rather than cost of consequence, but I have to tell you, in my opinion, your Windows vulnerabilities should be top priority, especially those with known exploits. So just replace KEV with ransomware and check where those vulnerabilities are. And you won't be surprised to see, Google Chrome, Firefox, I've heard that before. I think it was on that webcast called Common Sense OT Security. So this is my advice for you, my friends, when you want to make a difference and when you don't want to spend days or weeks just doing the analysis, etc. It's much easier. Figure out the troublemakers that drag along thousands of vulnerabilities, and then try to eliminate the troublemakers. If that is not possible because somebody credibly tells you, some user, you actually need that browser here, then make sure that they update the damn browser. That takes a couple of minutes, and the beauty is no downtime is needed. How nice is that, right? That's certainly different when you want to update an operating system from Windows 7 to something newer, or when you have to update firmware. Those are also scenarios where, you will need downtime. Okay, so that is my advice for today. By the way, we do have a guide, a handbook that elaborates on our approach to vulnerability management. I'll just see if I can pull it up rather quickly. Okay, so on our homepage, if you go to resources, the OT Vulnerability Management Handbook. So if you want to have it in writing, go to our website and download that handbook. That might give you some additional thoughts along the way. Okay, so that's my advice for today. We do have one question or comment. Let's see. From Imad Edine Ouazani. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. It is not easy decision to remove a web browser, especially since we're using the engineering workstation. Removing the browser would make maintenance. I totally agree. Yes. So let me be very clear about my point. When you see those web browsers that are known to be prone for vulnerabilities, you figure out if it is needed. And in your case, Imad, well, it's clearly needed. You're telling us we need those web browsers. Oh, good for you. Then the advice is make sure that the damn thing is up to date. Don't forget about that, right? However, I was talking about scenarios, and I think most of you will have seen that before, where a software product hasn't been used for a long time. That would not apply to your case, Imad. And what I also pointed out, OTBase will tell you right away, time of last execution. And it will show you right away how many days is that in the past. So that gives you a good angle for a hardening approach. If you tell me it's needed, no, the browser will stay on there. But you just want to make sure that it is always kept up to date. This is going a long way. Okay, no other question or comment. Then I would say, think about that very hard, my friends, and focus on efforts to reduce the complexity of your vulnerability management. Because at the end of the day, what's hard about OT vulnerability management is the cost of mitigation. Right? So how can you reduce that cost of mitigation? How can you gain leverage? By focusing on those big troublemakers is one advice. check how you can apply that in your infrastructure, in your environment. Thank you very much for your attention. See you next week.